This case is not just against Officer Jeffrey Freeman, deplorable though his actions are. This case is also against the city of Austin for its derelict, its dangerous, and its unconscionable training regimen. To suggest that a boy running at a police officer who is naked and unarmed and in need of help deserves to be shot, that's not the city that I live in.
Attorney Jeff Edwards, very passionate there, talking about his lawsuit on the behalf of the David Joseph family. He is not only suing the city of Austin, but he's also suing the officer who shot and killed David Joseph earlier this year. And he is here with us this morning to discuss some of the topics that I think we need to go in depth on. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, yesterday at your press conference, you were very passionate about the training at APD. And you said, look at the lawsuit, read it, and then we'll talk. So I did. And APD, according to you in this lawsuit, a police academy instructor testified that at APD, quote, we do not have a duty to retreat. We are not asking our officers to retreat all the way out the door and get back in their cars and go home. They need to take some kind of actions. What's wrong with that statement?
Well, what's wrong with that statement is that it was given in the context of the Citizen Review Panel with specific regard to the David Joseph shooting. In the ether, on its own, there is nothing technically wrong with that statement, but when it is given in the context of using deadly force, as if it's the same thing as handling a situation properly, that's what's so wrong. And when you suggest that it is proper to use deadly force because under a technical reading of the law, you may not have the same duty to retreat as a citizen, that is just bad police work. And that's probably what Chief Acevedo was trying to tell the cadets at the police academy when instead of being lauded for trying to do the right thing, he was reprimanded for doing the right thing.
Let's get to the video. We'll show you, too, of what exactly Jeff is talking about here. You say when David, and we'll freeze it at the time where it's uncomfortable to watch, especially for his family. When you see video of David running towards Officer Freeman right here, David is unarmed, and he is also naked. Jeff, my question to you is why? What don't we see before this? Why was he in the middle of the street? Why didn't he have clothes on? Why was he out there in the middle of a school day? What don't we know that you can tell us?
Well, I want to begin by saying, from the lawsuit's perspective and the law's perspective, it just doesn't matter. Because Officer Freeman would have no idea, just as you would have no idea why.
Right.
And so the police have to take into account the circumstances that they know. Here's what they knew. He was a boy. He was naked. He was unarmed. He presented absolutely no threat of imminent death, no threat of imminent serious bodily injury to anyone.
How do we know that? How does the officer know that at that very instant that this person running at them is not going to hurt them, is not going to struggle with them, is not going to, as Officer Freeman say, possibly take my gun? How do we know that?
Well, it's what a reasonable officer should do in those circumstances, what a reasonable officer would do in those circumstances. There is absolutely no indication and no suggestion that David Joseph was about to try to take Officer Freeman's gun. And what that is after the fact rationalizing in an attempt to justify the unjustifiable. Do police officers have a difficult job? Sure. But are they entitled to kill every single person that runs towards them? Now let me say that again. That's what we have here. The best case scenario for Officer Freeman is someone was running towards him, and after the fact, an officer says, I'm scared, he might take my gun, therefore I can end his life. And the point I was trying to make at the press conference yesterday is that simply does not happen in my neighborhood.
Your neighborhood, you touched on that. You're talking about neighborhoods that are not populated with African Americans. You say that there is an fair injustice happening in Austin. You say Austin police are shooting and killing black men. Those were your words.
Well, they're not my words, they're the facts. Look at the list of people that were shot and killed by the Austin Police Department in the last 10 years.
Jesse Lee, Daniel Rocha, Kevin Brown, Nathaniel Sanders, Byron Carter, Larry Jackson Jr., you named them in your lawsuit. But wouldn't you also agree that Austin police officers have confrontations with African Americans, Hispanics every single day, and it doesn't always end the way this ended?
No one's saying that in every situation the Austin Police Department discriminates. What we're saying is, and the facts back this up, is that when they choose to use deadly force and kill people in circumstances like you just saw on that TV, the person just so happens to be African American. Now we can chalk that up to, gee, it's just a coincidence. And the point again that I'm making is that needs to change. It is absolutely unacceptable. And what I said at that conference is, imagine that video as a 13-year-old girl from Westlake or a 14-year-old boy from Tarrytown. That does not happen. And while an officer has every right to be scared, we as the city of Austin also have every right to expect officers to do their job. And when they confront African Americans or Hispanics, as they inevitably do, and don't use deadly force or handle the situation without pulling out their gun and shooting, then they're doing their job. And that's something that's very important for the city to understand. This is not a case that suggests that all police officers are failing in their duties. Far from it. What we're saying is that some officers are acting unreasonably, and part of the problem is they're not being trained adequately. And what is bordering on shocking to me is that when a police chief actually does decide to go and help, rather than being lauded, the city manager has the gall and the audacity solely to protect the city from possible ramifications in a lawsuit to suggest he shouldn't. That is absolutely unfair, and that jeopardizes and continues to jeopardize the lives of young African Americans.
This case did go before the grand jury, and I want you to listen to this next interview, get your reaction on the other side.
Sure.
I think that he'll be put back to work, and we're going to be asking for all of his back pay.
He's saying Officer Freeman wants his job back. He may not want his job back under the current police chief, but he wants to be a police officer out on the streets of Austin again. And why should he not, if the grand jury says what you did was cleared of any kind of criminal wrongdoing? It was not a crime.
First of all, let me begin by talking about the grand jury process.
Okay.
If I was presenting evidence to the grand jury, there would have been a criminal indictment. However, the City of Austin and its District Attorney's Office does not present evidence in the appropriate way. They do not make a decision about whether or not conduct was wrongful. They treat, listen to this, every single police shooting, they treat the same way. That means, and most police shootings are justified and fine. This one's not. And to put them on the same level playing field, it's just absolutely, it's poor lawyering, and it doesn't do the job that the city needs us to do, which is why the Austin American-Statesman and many other people have said we need a different manner to investigate these police shootings at the grand jury process. As to what Mr. Rickman said,
sure, quickly.
By all means, try to get your job back. He didn't do his job. If he gets back on the streets,
yes, and
he's saying what he did was okay, that means that the next person who runs at him may be shot and killed. And that means that there'll be another Ketty Sully who lost her son. And for Mr. Rickman to talk about that as if Jeffrey Freeman is the victim, no, 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 no. The David Joseph family is the victim. David Joseph was the victim. And we ought to see contrition from Officer Freeman. We ought to see contrition from that lawyer who obviously doesn't understand what the law is, because this is easily excessive force. And any competent police practices expert will tell you that.
Okay, thank you for being here. We're going to continue our conversation, I'm sure, in the future, because you said you want this to be an open dialogue. So I invite you on here anytime that you want. We'll be right back after